Non-duality is simply a pointer that there is only one flow of life itself, and it's happening to no separate individual. And what's the essence of this non-duality is unknowable. So when we speak of anything, we can only speak of it from the limited knowledge we have, and the limited knowledge we have is useful for transactional activities. We can know various activities and engage in them, but we cannot know the ground from which the knowing itself rises. It is like a wave trying to understand the ocean. So, the key thing to first recognize is that it cannot be understood by the mind. It is when the attempt to understand stops that what is shines forth. So, when we look at the flow of life, we see that everything rises spontaneously. There is a spontaneity in everything. Perceptions happen spontaneously. Thoughts also happen spontaneously. Words and actions all happen spontaneously. And then there is another spontaneous movement, which is the one that causes the sense of separation. The spontaneous movement is the illusion of a separate ego, separate I, me, whatever we call it, a separate entity who claims ownership over what is happening. So when there is perception, the perception simply happens, but there is the spontaneous me that rises that says, it is my experience of perception. I am seeing, I am hearing. It's one thing to simply use the I as a first person pronoun. There is nothing wrong with that. But to ossify it as an experiencing structure which persists across each moment as some entity that is separate from the happening, that is the also a spontaneous illusion. It's also not, essentially it's non-different from the same energy. The same energy that brings forth perceptions, brings forth actions, brings forth various thoughts and words and everything, also brings forth along with it this false sense of separation. And this false sense of me then claims ownership to the experience and says it's my experience or my action or my thought or my speech. And the word mine, aham mama, it says, it's in Sanskrit, me and mine. This aham and mama, me and mine, causes the bondage of attachment. And this aham and mama persists across everything, whether it's relations, whether it's the past, whether it's future, and whether it's ideas, whether it's nationality, whether it's so many other ways in which the I and mine wants to separate itself out and perpetuate itself. The strange thing about it is that if we look at it, it's actually a ever fleeting entity. So that is why it is something that persists only in darkness. If we think, we presume that there is a me, and this me is always there. But if we look at it, it's actually a phantom entity that keeps on changing. The me that claims ownership over an idea, the me that claims ownership over a taste in food or a experience of travel, all of these are different instances, and yet there is this illusion that it's the same me that persists across all of these experiences and events and happenings and so on. So that is why the question of looking at the me, we can say the question, who am I, is essentially that question. It's not a question to be used as a way to find something, because nothing can be found that's not already there. It is only a way to negate the false me. So when we say, who is this I, we find that it is simply another rising of, we can say, thought or an energetic movement, because it's more than just a thought in the sense of how we see a thought. It's something that's rising from our very heart. It seems it rises as me, and it seems to have this quality of persistence. But if we look at it, we see that it is actually simply a rising of energy that is contracting itself, that is sort of separating itself from the flow of movement. So there is the constant flow of energy, flow of life, and within that flow of life, there is this separative movement which wants to claim ownership of the movement itself, while it is itself a part of the same movement. And then we then try to find the source of this, and that very activity also becomes another activity of the same separative movement. So we say, I am, even when we say things such as, I am witnessing thoughts, the one witnessing thoughts is actually another thought. There cannot be, in the, as long as there is a duality between the subject and the object, then witnessing is another way in which the same duality persists. And that's why even words like awareness, it can be used in different ways. But if we say, I am aware of thoughts, there are many meditation practices where being aware of the bodily sensations, being aware of breath, being aware of thoughts, all these are shown. And they also are in the same realm of duality, because it's only by separating oneself from breath or from thought or from bodily sensation, we can say, I am observing it. But the very observation is again a movement of knowledge, movement of thought, movement of the same energy. What illuminates the observer and the observed is what is the source, which is unknowable. Because the moment we try to know it, we again get caught in the same game of duality by separating ourselves out of the movement of life. So there is the one flow, and that flow is as is perfect, and its very essence is pure being. But that cannot be an object of knowledge or experience. It's neither knowledge nor experience, but it is simply being. So when we recognize this, that this false me is the only obstacle, and what is already free, everything is happening perfectly, and this moment now, even to say this moment is again, there is a division of time that is coming from a recognition of a flow of time. In reality, all there is this as what is, and what is perfect, and it is the expression of the divine energy that manifests as everything there is. And if we don't, or rather, if I cannot say if we don't, we if we recognize the separative movement, and thereby it drops off, or at least it is dissolved in that recognition, then there is the recognition of freedom, because everything is perfectly flowing as is right now. That is why there is a famous verse in the Mandukya Upanishad, which is a very radical verse, it will seem, but it's actually the direct pointer. Gaudapada writes there that he says, "Na nirodho na cha utpattir, na baddho na cha sadhakah, na mumukshur na vaimukta ityesha paramarthata." He says there is no creation, there is no destruction. Na nirodho na cha utpattir, na baddho na cha sadhakah. There is nobody in bondage, there is nobody called a seeker. Na mumukshu na vaimukta. There is no one desiring liberation, and ultimately navai mukta, there is no such thing as liberation even. Ityesha paramarthata, this is the supreme truth. So that's the highest pointer of non-duality, is not seeking liberation, because the very seeking of liberation is out of this illusion, but to recognize that the very seeker is false. There is no such thing as bondage, there is no such thing as liberation, because already what is free. So that is not something to be acquired through any method or technique, but only through direct inquiry. And when we recognize this directly, then it is what is. And the reason he says no creation, no destruction either is because everything is rising spontaneously each moment. And even to conceive of creation and destruction, we have to project time and beginning of time and end of time. All of these are thought constructs. There is only this each moment, and this is as is, and it moves on in its own way with its own intelligence. And the source of this intelligence is what we can call God, or pure being, or so many terms, but none of the terms can actually capture it. So it is what is. And therefore, to simply be still, which is to say, to not identify with the seeker, not identify with the me in any form, recognize the me as false, and just let life flow without any separation. So to say, and the separation is so spontaneous, that's the most important thing to recognize, is that it's not something that is um, an activity of thought in the way thought otherwise works. It spontaneously rises in every human, and that is why there is and presumably in animals too, but more so in humans, because we spontaneously reflect and create a self, individual self, by dividing ourselves from the experience of what's happening. So, that spontaneous division is what causes this illusion of a separate self. And therefore, that's the normal state of everyone. But the pointer of non duality is that that is a false separation and that can be seen directly. So, it is just as the spontaneous separation rises on its own, this pointer too comes through grace from the same source, that this separation is false. It is only an illusion, like an optical illusion. It's an illusion. It's like how someone gave this nice example. If we see uh, a fire, a stick with fire, and someone waves the fire fast, it seems like a ring of fire. But actually, there is no ring, there is only a stick with fire. But because it moves so fast, it seems like a ring of fire. Similarly, there is only each moment, and each moment is perfect, but it's all tied together into one entity due to the fast movement. So, in actuality, each moment is full in itself, but we link them like this ring of fire and we say there is a circle. There is no circle, there is only a point. Similarly, there is only each, there is only this, and this has no separation. So that's the direct pointer of non-duality. So it's non-duality is not about understanding Brahman or understanding lots of Upanishadic works, or we can study a little. There is always good pointers like Mandukya. We quoted the verse of Gaudapada. There are beautiful pointers in Upanishads, in Gita, but ultimately it is not to be gained through knowledge but through just direct inquiry and recognition. These pointers can be of help, but one cannot get caught up in them either, and that becomes its own bondage then. If we hold them lightly as a pointer and simply recognize the direct truth of what is now, then that is the only way we are recognizing the freedom of what is, not through any acquisitive or accumulative process, not through gaining more knowledge, not through gaining more experience and any of that. So it is, that's why available to everyone through grace, and we simply have to, each moment when we see this fresh. So it doesn't matter how much we have learned or studied or meditated or any of that, this moment is fresh, and we can look at it this moment fresh and recognize it directly.